All right, it's season 1, episode 4 of Talk Me Through Your Process podcast about leadership, principalship, people journeying to do more than what they're already doing. And it's hosted by Chris Clough, Ramona Maharg, and myself, Roland Chidiak. And I'm really excited for tonight's conversation because we have EJ Hunt, who on Twitter is known as @Eli_James Hunt. And he is a principal in my neck of the woods with the Waterloo Catholic District School Board. And I'm really happy that EJ reached out and said, hey, man, I'd love to talk with you guys about leadership and the journey to becoming a principal. So, EJ, thanks a lot for that. When I told the team, we were pretty excited, and then we just had to hammer out a date and time. So we've been able to land, and I'm really happy because I've missed talking in this forum. So welcome back, everybody. And EJ, thanks for joining us.
No worries. It's exciting to be here. I've listened to some of your conversations. I can't say I've listened to all seasons, but recently I've been engaging in some of the dialogue you guys have been having, and I really appreciate the thoughts that you put out there.
That's great. So let's just dive right in and tell everybody what you currently do.
So currently, I'm the principal of St. Peter. It's a school in Cambridge. We have about 277 students. And as of next week, we'll only have about 202 face-to-face, and the rest will be learning online. It's a great little school. I would say it's a fantastic place to learn as a new administrator because you have a great staff. Like when I actually had a funeral that I had to go to yesterday. My wife's grandpa passed away, and they reorganized the classes. We talked about it. I left a news wire out, but then they went outside and we formed our new cohorts outside, masked, 2 meters apart, physically distant outdoors, and they formed their new classes that are going to start after Tuesday. So the kids all went home and they had seen who their new classmates are going to be. They were able to talk to their parents about it that night. I got zero emails from a parent to say, I'm a little upset with the class placements, that these teachers decided. I'm a little bit worried about no, the teachers are great there. And they really set me up for success. And I really do feel like the staff, all the support staff are wonderful too. My first year there, I had a custodian who would come in on Saturdays before my superintendent visit on Monday, and just to make sure the school sparkled. Like, that's the kind of community that you walk into, and you can't really take much credit for it. You just have to kind of ride that wave and learn from all the people around you. So,
well, I've been seeing your tweets and the way that you showcase your staff, even talking to you privately outside of Twitter. You're loving every minute of being at St. Peter's, and I think that's great because those schools need a principal like that. And I know some of the staff members on your team, and they're good people. I've worked with them before. High energy, dedicated to the profession. So I'm really happy that things are working out for you. One thing that you and I talked about a little bit before we arrived today for the podcast episode is that you're not originally from the Waterloo Catholic District School Board, correct?
No. So actually my journey started in Toronto, because I think we all come into teaching in different times. I came in 2006, where finding a job was very, very difficult. And I got a job at a private school. It was not like, don't think St. Michael's College where it's, automatic, scanners. Think like, hey, we're going to run this like a charity, and some of your tuition is like a tax credit. And by the way, when you come for a tour of the school, don't mind the bucket where the roof leak is. Like, it was very basic school. But, it was a good start to learn, because you were the chemistry teacher. So you had to learn the curriculum and figure it out. And it built a lot of resilience. And then I left there. I got my first LTO in a school in Brantford called St. John's College. And that was a fantastic experience, except we were living in Pickering at the time. My wife had a job downtown Toronto. So my 407 bill was $500 a month for about 5 months. And then I said I either quit or we move. So we moved to Burlington. That was the middle. And then did the Brantford thing for a while. And it was one of those hires in high school where it's like, okay, I'll give you a contract one section at a time and fill it with LTOs until eventually a couple years later, I had a full contract. But at the full contract point, that was also the point of declining enrollment. And so they moved me to elementary. And so I had done, I would argue, I was a good teacher. I think most people would say that they're good teachers. But I was picked to do a lot of 9 applied and 9 academic EQAO stuff. There was some trailing data that showed my students were highly successful. And then I got pulled to elementary. And so I was like, okay, so decorated the classroom for elementary. And I was like, man, this is going to be a hard gig. Like, I need to go on vacation. So I went to Florida after my classroom was ready to go. And then I got a call from the director when I was in Florida saying, hey, there's a math consultant kind of thing position. I'm like, man, I'm a biology teacher. I have my math intermediate. Like, I'm not your guy. And he's like, apply anyway. We want you to apply. So I'm like, okay. So I applied to the job, got the consultant job. So it went from high school to elementary to consultant in like 2 months and was just a complete whirlwind. But that sort of builds on, this idea of fighting for that job and then feeling that success. Like when the director calls you, you're kind of like, okay, your head expands a little bit, right? And that's a dangerous thing. Right. Back then, it was like a pat on the back, a couple of years into this teaching gig. I think it was year 5 of my teaching career. So, year 5 to be called by the director, kind of a cool thing. So then I went and I did the consulting gig for about a year or so. But the director kind of tapped me while I was consulting. And he said, I think you should do your master's. And I was like, me? Okay. So I looked into my master's, and OISE had U of T had this thing where you can get your PQPs and your master's at the same time. And they were one of the only schools doing it at the time. So I did my PQPs at the same time, and then basically got into the principal pool halfway through that experience. My PQPs part was done, and I was sort of completing the master's. And then probably by the second year of doing that job, we moved into our house here. My wife had our first child, and I finished my master's all in the same June. It was a crazy, crazy month. And I was in the principal pool. So like life was good. This is awesome. And, you're feeling like you're on top of everything. And it was good. It felt really good. I thought I was doing a lot of really great work, and then I got placed actually the second year. They said to me, they had that private conversation and said, we need to go to such and such school. I'm like, okay, that sounds great. That's fine. And so I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to be a VP. This is going to be a VP. It's going to be great. And then the day that they made it public, they came to me and said, sorry, you're not going to be a VP. Oh, okay. Well, what? Sometimes these things happen. I'm sorry. Just, we're not going to do it. The me of now would look back and say, you weren't ready, right? But the me of back then was like, oh, okay, things just don't happen. The director picked me to be the consultant. I got my master's, like, I am this great teacher. I couldn't really see that my pride and ego was getting in the way. And I don't even know if they probably offered feedback if I would have really taken it per se, but I do feel very much like it's a double-edged sword because feedback was not a big thing. It was not like, hey, we want you to be a VP, and here are the 4 things that we explicitly would like you to work on. And I don't know if is there a way for them to do that, because right now I've got great, amazing teachers in my school. I'm doing TPAs right now. Trying to make the process as easy as possible, but we'd rather get it done before we have to go virtual or something. But basically, like teachers are saying, is there something I could improve on? And, I'm really grasping here because they're great teachers. And am I going to be that nitpicky? Like, am I really going to say, oh, well, that one time I didn't see a learning goal up. Like, no, their learning goals are up all the time. Their success criteria are there. The things that they're doing are amazing in their class. Am I going to pick at them? But in leadership, if you legitimately have a reason why somebody should not be an administrator, I think there needs to be some explicit communication on that. But then let's just kind of continue that journey. So then I do my thing. And at this point, I'm also feeling like, families are important to me. Like, if you were to say what gets you up in the morning for being a teacher, it's the ability to call somebody and say, can I just tell you how great your kid is? Like, you got to know how good Johnny did on the exponents test that we just did, or, oh my goodness, the way Susie participated in class today, like that makes me come alive. And to not do that, because in the consultant role, you can't be like, hi, I'm a creeper consultant who happened to get your phone number from the teacher. Who are you? What are you doing in my kid's class? Like, you can't do that. You can't make direct contact with families because you're not directly connected to the families. So I kind of had the conversation with the board to say, hey, like I really do want to transition back to a school. And then I said, I'll do this one more year, but like, I'm not going to do it again. Like, and it's a tough one, right? Because the board's in a spot where it's a small board. I was in my mind, and I think in their mind too, I was doing great work. We won EQAO awards for raising student achievement. Like, the board's leadership series for my PQP, for my practicum, since I was in a system role, I had a really great PQP instructor. And she said, well, if you're doing a system role now, you should do a system practicum. So like the leadership series, I did that for our board. And even how I say that sounds so arrogant. I did that. Well, did I? Or did I help facilitate it? And a whole bunch of people propped me up for success. But in my mind back then, my bucket was filled and I was like, I'm the best, I can do this. But, didn't really see that. So then we get to year 2 and they say, hey, and year 2 being 3 of consulting, but 2 of being in the pool. And they say, hey, you're going to be a vice principal and this is your school. And I say, okay, awesome. And then I'm going and going and going. And then the day they make it public, they said to me again, hey, just got to tell you, it did not work out. I'm sorry, you're not going to be the vice principal of school X. Whoa, that was hard. That was a process that hurt. And I said, okay, I literally have to leave. I left the board office and I just drove and I called my wife and I was like, okay, I'm just telling you right now, I'm not going to be vice principal. And she's laughed on the phone and she's like, stop joking. They wouldn't do that to you 2 years in a row. That's not even funny. And I'm like, 2 years in a row, they decided that I was not ready to be a vice principal. Okay. That's true. It happened. Right. And, at that point, I challenged the superintendent. And when I say challenge the superintendent, you got to understand these people are fantastic people. I really have nothing to say against them personally. I think the process didn't work out for me in a very painful way. But I also feel like I know I have a whole lot of things. I got emails this past week from, some staff members who say, you know what, hey, I feel hurt. You left me out of the process. And I say, you know what, you're right. I did. I messed up this week. Like I tried to reorganize a school in 3 days. I'm sorry. You are right. I'm doing the best I can and it's not good enough. So I get there are situations and circumstances where people get hurt in the process and, it's not meant to be that way, but it happens. But I did say to the superintendent, I said, can you give me some feedback here? This is a big deal. And he said, well, I kind of already have. And I said, really? Okay, so tell me about that feedback. And he said, well, there was that time, I said, your greatest strengths lie on the edge of your greatest weaknesses. Okay. And then do you remember I did try to talk to you about how, be careful how fast you go, because sometimes when you get too far out in front, you begin to look like the enemy. Oh, okay. But that was his impression of courageous conversation and deep feedback. For me, I'm that guy who's out there. One of my strengths is just putting it out there. One of my weaknesses is just putting it out there. So, he was right. But, for me, I would have loved to have a conversation after the first time that said, okay, listen, we care about you. We're invested in you. You're amazing. We want you to develop So here, I would like you to meet with this person a couple of times a year, or like, let's talk about feedback. So I was like, okay. So I'm still confused because I was talking to him. I said, could I please, like, I think I need to seek out some more feedback. And so I went to the director, and he said something really interesting to me. He said, I would advise you to go to some of our more higher level principals, and you know who they are, and go ask them for feedback. But also, I want you to think about something too. When you're in the role, you can't always seek out feedback. Like, for instance, maybe you'll write an email and you'll walk down the hallway and you'll notice that something's not right. And you have to be able to perceive that things aren't going well. And you have to be able to notice that, things aren't really where you think they are. And so I think that that's some work you need to do. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. So that's fair. That's honest feedback. I appreciate that, but it's feedback about not being able to perceive feedback. So like, I was like, all right, I will try my best. So then I went to a couple principals. One of them said to me, I think your strengths are just not your strengths that you think they are. And he was talking about like emotional intelligence. And I kind of think like I'm a pretty emotionally intelligent guy. But I also think that in certain scenarios that I worked with that particular principal, I don't think I shone. When you're working with a lot of people as a consultant, 7 people love you and 3 people hate you, and he might have been the 3 that hate. But you know what? Fine. Like I got the feedback, and I was like, okay, I'm not gonna let that be my entire feedback and think my whole emotional intelligence is just out the window. But I was like, all right, I got to recognize that not everybody is my fan. That's fair. Then I went to another principal, and he said one thing to me. He's like, when you came into my office, you walked by my admin assistant, knocked on the door, and sat down. What do you think I have an admin assistant for? And I said, whoa, okay. That is not who I want to be. Like, first of all, so my door's open. If you come in, welcome. I'm glad you're here, not the other way around. And the reason why I walked in to give them feedback was I was saying, hey, this person's doing really great in 9 applied. I think you should really try to keep them there. This person's better suited for grade 11, college or whatever. Like, just trying to help him put his aces in his places in his school when he was doing, sort of timetabling, like just giving him some helpful information, but whatever. Then he said something to me though that really like hit, and he's like, EJ, you're like Gretzky. I said, oh, thinking, wow, Gretzky, greatest player that I've lived. That's all right. And he said, yeah, nobody wants to be on Gretzky's team. He scores all the goals. Ouch. That was harsh. But I was really good. But would you want to be on Gretzky's team? And that stung. That was like, because and he said, I was in for one of your sessions where you're debriefing the teachers, and there was a lot of great conversation going on, but you were the only one talking. So I was like, oh, okay. And feel free to jump in, by the way, because I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I figure like this is the share the story part. So then I left there, and I got feedback from one other person. So just to add sort of insult to injury, throughout this whole process, when you are a consultant and you no longer want to be a consultant, or your 3 years are up or whatever, you go and you apply to get back into schools. Well, every time I would go to my superintendent to say, hey, you want me to apply to go to a school? He would say, no, don't apply. Like, you're going to be our VP. Don't worry. Don't apply. Well, then when they didn't do that, the only school left was a very challenging school in our district. And they hide the results a little bit because they blend it with French immersion. So you've got these really, really high kids with kids that, have parents that come to parent meetings, sometimes using substances, kids that are, just struggle. And when I look at that, I was like, I will go there, but I would have loved to have gone there on my own accord to actually say, I'm choosing this rather than this is a choice being thrust upon me. If you've ever seen the Bad Teacher movie, it kind of felt like, Amy Squirrel, where she's like, when the superintendent asks you to go to the worst district or school in the district, you say, yes, they're ready for my kind of energy. And I was just like, so it kind of makes me feel like it was a bit of that moment. So when I get there, I talked to that principal. I said, like, listen, this is where I'm at. I got to let you know, I've taught chemistry and math my entire life. Gym, art, literacy are all brand new to me, but I'll give you my best from the first day to the end. I will continue to learn. And, but I'm curious, can I just get some feedback from you? Because I've been asking other principals. And he said, yeah. So a couple of years ago, you were in a math meeting with us, and you just said something in this meeting. He didn't even tell me what I said, but he's like, it just didn't sit well with the group. I'm like, so 2 years ago, you remember this? And 2 years ago, not one of the principals came alongside and said, that didn't fly well. Like how you tried to get that point across made a lot of us uncomfortable. I would really like you to fix what you're doing. Right? But it was important enough for him to remember for 2 years, but it wasn't important enough that he would go give that person that feedback. Right? So that was kind of an interesting one. And then I guess when I was at that school, that is the most humbling experience ever. Any high school teacher who thinks they have it tough needs to go teach in elementary. I've lived both, and I'm sorry, but when the first time they came to me and said, yeah, there was no supply teacher, your French is gone for today. I'm like, what? I only have 40 minutes a day anyway. Why are you taking it? Like I was used to 75 minutes a day. And then when I was covering an on-call, I would still do some work while the kids were doing whatever. And now they're taking my 40 minutes and I have to prepare, 8 different subjects that I don't even know about right now. It was a big learning curve. And then on top of that, you had the bitterness piece, right? Because I was angry. My ego was hurt. I felt a little humiliated. A lot of the people that had gone through the leadership series that I developed were now placed. And I'm here in this grade 7-8 job, and not to knock grade 7-8 because I have just did a TPA this week on a teacher who, if I had a dream and said, if I could just go back and be a grade 7-8 teacher for 20 years and see what my pedagogy could be like, I only hope I could be as good as her. And being a master at what you do is no shot down, no put down on being grade 7-8 at all. But for me, it was one of those, okay, I thought I was going to be the VP of a school like this rather than be in that classroom. And so I think it was a good case of you don't know what you don't know. And it was so important for me to do that. I learned so much. And in fact, one of the things I learned, I didn't learn, let's talk about the learning about in the class. I mean, I had to call on my consultant friends and be like, I was in tears. I literally looked at her and I said, look, the math curriculum has a point. I have to cover this, this, and this. This literacy document says you need to have the writers express their ideas. Give me a box, like let me work in some constraints here. What do you mean? Well, you can do whatever you want. Whatever I want. What does that mean? Like I was just overwhelmed with the sheer creativity of literacy. I was like, okay, well, this is crazy. And then, gym well, let's just say those kids survived my gym class. But, we got through it and I learned a ton. That principal, I found out later from, some of my colleagues who are principals there. They're like, why you didn't get placed the first time, right? And I was like, no. And they're like, because that principal is the one who vetoed you. He vetoed you because you were a secondary teacher and you didn't have any elementary experience and he refused to work with you. And I was like, okay. But then this same principal is the one who backed me when it came time to becoming a vice principal in a different board. So a man of integrity, a man of honesty, a man of, he wants to do what he feels is best for his school. But it was just one of those things where my biggest advocate was originally my obstacle, and I didn't know it at the time. But, he taught me a lot about self-regulation. We learned a lot about that in his school. And he took a school that when I was first there as a consultant before he was a principal there, that was really, I would argue, a struggling school. And he turned it into a destination school. Like, I want people to think when I go to this school, this is the place to be. And he really did. He really did transform it. And it was powerful learning for me to look at a school and say, this does not have to be the story. We can create the story for the school. And I think it was important to walk with that. And so then I spent a lot of time serving that year. I tried to find service projects because, quite frankly, I didn't feel good about being a teacher. I was like, and I had a little bit of Maya Angelou come out, like, don't make anybody a priority if you're only an option to them. So I did what was right for the kids, but like I didn't really do any of the extras that I had done for the past years. And when we're talking extras, I mean my second son was born on a Friday and I was leading collaborative inquiry and math on a Monday. If I could go back and do it again, I'd put my family first, 100%. And that you can't work your way to a vice principalship. That's the thing. You have to grow your way there. And some of those lessons aren't able to be just, well, if I just prepare enough, or if I just put in enough hours, or if I just like, it's not going to work. So then that year I got a call actually halfway through the semester saying, hey, declining enrollment's now over and you have recall rights. Do you want to leave? And I literally teared up in the office. I'm looking at my grade 7-8 who just happened to be like signing in. And I'm tearing up because I'm like, I can't leave now. And it was like second semester. And so I talked to the superintendent, who's now a director in a different board. And I said, can we not find a win-win here? Can I finish my year out at this school and then go back to high school later? And so, yes, so then I did that. I finished out my year with these kids and did that journey, learned a ton from doing graduation and being on the graduation committee and learning all about that side of things. And then I went and did high school. So I was back in my comfort zone from a curriculum perspective. And then I was able to focus on getting into the principal pool. Now, at this point, I had gotten here you go, we're adding you to the pool again. It's almost like make America great again. It's like, doesn't sound that great the second time. So I didn't really want to take that with any grain of salt. And so then I went and started applying at other workplaces. So I applied to Halton first, and Halton was great. I had a good experience with the interview. I just messed up one question, and I knew I messed it up. I went home and I Googled the question. And I was like, oh, the equity question. I messed it up. And there was some sort of equity survey you're supposed to do with your school that, and we know we have different processes in each board to measure how we're doing for equity. But I didn't do that question right. And then when I got the debrief from the superintendent, he's like, every other question is great, but you really have some learning to do in this area. I was like, okay, fine. And then I did Hamilton, concurrently. I was doing all these ones. And at Hamilton Wentworth, honestly, the public board there is the best process I have ever seen. The superintendent came in and she was like, okay, just so you know, look around. Stop thinking of these people as your competition. I'll hire all of you if I can. These people are your colleagues. So work with them, grow with them, get through this process together, and you guys can all be principals. It's okay. And it was a really cool process. And the way the paperwork that you had to do for that made you think a lot. And then they had practice interviews where they had principals come in and coach you and help you do better. But I was really interested. I was really impressed with the process, and I was really, thought about how wonderful it would be. So I really tried hard for that, really hard, and over prepared. And when I say over prepared, I mean they asked about how you handle diverse students, and I think I said something like, "Oh well, we'll celebrate Christmas," and I was like, "Did I just say Christmas in the diversity answer?" It was really bad, embarrassingly bad. And I actually wrote the superintendent. I've never done this in my life for a job interview, and said, "I'm sorry. Please, I really did try for your process. Please don't think I was wasting your time. I'm embarrassed by my performance, but thank you so much. I learned so much." And then Waterloo Catholic was sort of happening in the same, that was, I don't know, November or something. And then Waterloo Catholic interview was January. And when I did the Waterloo Catholic interview, I did a complete opposite approach. I did not prepare at all, I did the paperwork, but I did not prepare at all. But all that work that I had done for Hamilton had sunk in. And now it just started flowing, and answers came out. And there was also a disconnect between, having a faith background. I'm not saying you can't have a faith background in a public school board, but some of the leadership answers are all about Catholicity and how do you, model faith and grow your school community's faith, right? So some of the natural tendencies that I have is from teaching in a Catholic board, sort of came out in the interview process, and it just flowed. And I got feedback after that interview that said, thank you. That was the best interview of the day. It was good. I was like, okay, I can do this. It's going to be okay. And then I got placed, went into VP-ship for a year and a half, had two principals. The first principal is amazing. And this is what I wish I had when I was a consultant, because as a VP, the principal looks at you and said, if you've got a great principal, they look at you and say, listen, I am here to support you and help you be successful. So everything that you need to learn, I will teach you, and we'll work together on this, and we'll make sure you're going to be good. You were hired for a reason. The board saw something in you. I'm not going to judge the board. If they put you here, you're here for a reason. I know you're going to be successful. How can we help? And like, it was awesome. Like, so he said, when I was a vice principal, the principal didn't give me any control of anything. What do you want? Like, you name it, you pick something, you take it on. Like, I did all the scheduling, I did this, that, and the other. And it was just a really supportive environment. And then you fast forward a little bit, and I get a new principal, and that principal got moved. And so the new principal said, like, listen, you haven't been placed as a principal yet. I really want you to be successful. What can we do? And basically I said, well, I need some deeper learning in spec ed. He's like, done, we'll catch you up on your spec ed learning. And he's like, did you do anything with the fundraiser last year? And I said, no, I didn't do anything with the fundraiser. He's like, you're running our fundraiser and you're doing it by the end of October. And then we can say to the board that you've done everything that a principal would need to do. Okay. Like, and then I got placed in the January into St. Peter. So like, the experience in Waterloo has been very different, but I don't necessarily know if that's because it's like I'm a vice principal and they're investing in their vice principals, or whether it's because there's a distinction in the board, or whether it's going from that teacher place to that principal place. And then I don't know. I think I should stop talking and let you guys ask some questions, and I can go on for some more after. But yeah. Thanks.
I appreciate you sharing your journey, and I took some notes. I don't even know where to start because you dropped a lot of wisdom there. Some funny points when you said that you came to Waterloo for your interview and you weren't really prepared. It reminded me of the Seinfeld episode where George Costanza does everything like backwards. He's like, I'm just going to do the opposite of what I normally do, and everything falls into place for him. So I'm a Seinfeld fan. So that was funny. But, you talked about courageous conversations. It sounds like the vibe I'm getting is some of the conversations you had were politically cloaked and people were not giving you the honest feedback about what they needed to see from you. And that it doesn't sit well with me, because if they don't want you to be a leader in their system, they should tell you that. And I guess they can't really come out and do that, but they can say things. It's this nonsense of like people not telling you what you need to know. It kills me. Like when you were saying that, you asked the principal for feedback and he had remembered something from 2 years before. Never said anything to you, but now's the perfect time to bring that up, right? Stuff like that just kind of, it annoys me personally. I found it interesting. And here's my question to you. So when you were doing your master's and the PQPs were involved, did you have any inkling or like desire to become a principal, or they were just part of the program? You're like, well, I'm here doing it. I'm going to do everything that's part of the program. Like, did you ever think, I think I'm going to become a principal?
No, when I was in teachers college, I asked the person, I said, like, I'm sorry, but like, to be honest, I hadn't met my wife yet. I was big into camp, and I was like, I'm going to be a teacher for the summers off so I can work with kids all summer long. And then I was like, oh, okay, met my wife. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do the camp thing. I'll just make a difference in kids' lives, for 10 months of the year, which is still pretty amazing. And then but I asked them while I was in teachers college, like, why would you want to ever be a principal? And they said to me, and it stuck with me, there's two things. They said, one, you're never ever going to get so upset with something until you want to change it. And then if you can't change it because you're not in control of it, then you'll want to be a principal, because you'll realize the only way you can actually change what's going on is if it was your building and you can actually make a difference. And then the other piece too, they said, vice principals get overlooked all the time. But when you're a vice principal, you are literally there in the most chaotic, traumatic point in people's lives. If you're thinking of, I'm thinking of a secondary VP during a rape crisis or something like that. Like that person, that family is in crisis, and you are there, a rock for them and able to support them in a time of crisis. And so well, those things stuck with me. And then once I was doing my master's, like, okay, I think I really want to make that my new sort of why. And don't get me wrong, you don't get a crisis every day, but I've had to recalibrate. Like I can no longer say, like, I don't call people's partners and be like, hey, just got to let you know your wife's lesson today was amazing. Like I don't call people's houses like I did for kids, but you can still tell a teacher that they did a great job. And, one of the things I'm learning is the word notice. I texted one of my teachers and I just said, I noticed that you changed your position in the class. So we're in social distant rows and we're stuck with all these kids, in the spots that they're in. And so she made the front of the back of the room, the back of the room. And I said, you made those kids feel special just for sitting at the back of the room half the time because you move where you are. I know you don't hear it often enough as you deserve, but I noticed that and you're really good at what you do. And like that to me makes me come alive because that teacher can go and enjoy the rest of her night. And she knows that I noticed. I really did notice that it's a little thing, but it's a big thing because she's worked really hard in her career to be good at what she does. And so now my sort of inner passion comes from helping teachers see their value and not just teachers like EAs, ECEs, custodians, administrators, like they all contribute, but it doesn't always seem like it. And sometimes people don't notice their contributions and they're like, oh, that person, it's like, well, hold on a sec. You don't know all the stuff that person did when you weren't in the building. They contribute a lot.
Do you think that you'd be approaching things this way if it hadn't been for the experiences that you've had as a teacher and a consultant and your kind of, I'm going to use the word bumpy, your bumpy road to admin?
No, I think bumpy is accurate. But I was the one with the gas pedal on, right? This is the thing. Like, I think if I look back and I say, well, it's their fault, then I rob myself of the learning. This is my life. I made a lot of choices. When I reflect back, I can think, I'll give you some specific examples where I'm like, oh, this probably wasn't my finest moment. Like, okay, I don't know if you're familiar with Catholic faith, but there's like the priest and he's at his altar, and then there's like a lectern at the side. Well, I went up in the middle of a mass with all the trustees there and all the principals, the director, everybody. And I read from the wrong spot. And the priest is like, you're supposed to be over there. And it's like, how embarrassing. That was brutal. But for me, I was not a cradle Catholic. I was RCIA, which means I joined as an adult. And I just kind of sat at the back. So I didn't really notice the particulars of who was reading from what from where. So I looked at that and said, okay. So I went to my superintendent at the end of the day and I was just like, hey, I'm sorry, And he taught me something big there. He said, no worries. Everybody makes mistakes. What he was probably thinking was, you're a complete moron. I can't believe you embarrassed us in front of all the trustees like that. But what he said was, don't worry, everybody makes mistakes. No big deal. Because he knew I was already kicking the crap out of myself. Like inside, I was the one who was giving me the worst feedback ever. He knew what I needed was a pat on the back. He said, in our discussions, he said, a leader's job is to make those who are comfortable uncomfortable and to make those who are uncomfortable comfortable. And it was just one of those examples where he was, living what he was teaching me. But I say all that to say, I kind of lost a bit of my train of thought, but taking responsibility was important to me. So now I was like, okay, if I'm in this elementary school, my principal said, okay, so you're going to be in charge of the liturgy next. I'm like, what? Where's the chaplain? That's the high school chaplain's job. No, you're an elementary, buddy. Like, you run the show. So I needed to learn about that. So I went and I was like, okay, let me read. I became a reader in my church so I could figure out what the heck was going on. Like, what is the order of mass? Like, let me actually know what is going on so I can be a better spiritual leader. So that was an example of, well, I could just look back and say, well, that was a really bad day. Or I could look back and say, this is a gap in my learning and I can address this. And now I feel very comfortable. And it results in some weird things like at communion, it's time to stand for prayer and you're the only one in the church who stands because a lot of your families don't necessarily go to church, and that's okay. But you stand because it's the right time to stand. And then the priest says, okay, stand up. But it's important that the principal knows when to stand. Like, you got to model, right? That's part of our role. But it's also part of our role to understand, what? I know what it feels like to mess that up. So what I said to the grade 3s was, listen, and I said this to them on the the Friday before it was on a Saturday. I said, listen, guys, you know what? You sit down, you stand up, you mess it up. The whole thing's because Jesus loves you no matter what, how many mistakes you make. So who cares? Just relax and enjoy it. It's going to be okay. Because I know what it's like to make a gigantic mistake in front of everybody, and it doesn't feel great. So I just try to take the pressure off them and make sure that they are safe and feeling good about that. So that in some ways it has come out. TPAs are another big one. Because of this process, it was so strange. So the superintendent said to me, you know what, like, you're fantastic, great year for TPA, blah, 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 blah. And then she was banking on, I don't think, doing my TPA because I would be placed, but then they decided not to place me. So then she said, well, since you're not going to be placed, I think it'd be a really good idea if you did your TPA in grade 7-8. I said, hold on a sec. I was at the top of my game. We had a great TPA debrief conversation, and you didn't give me any negative feedback at all. I'm in first year grade 7-8 teacher. I don't think so. I'm not doing my TPA. I want you to write my TPA. Write it. So she did. 1 sentence per box. 3 years of my life, 1 sentence per box. That hurt. So I know what it's like when a teacher says, I'm really interested in hearing your feedback, because yeah, it happens once every 5 years. And it's so important for you to actually give them the feedback that they deserve. You know, it might not all be rainbows, but you know what? You got to tell them how great they are, because they're not going to hear it again for 5 years. And if you can notice specific things about their pedagogy that rocks, you better say it, and you better take your time to write it, because it matters. Because I know how it feels to have a vice principal write that and make me feel like a rock star. And I know how it feels when a superintendent writes 1 sentence and it hurts. So in some ways it does affect you.
I have to say, I'm appreciating the vibe I'm getting from you with the connections you're making from your past experiences and how you're living today as a principal. And you've said a lot of things that really resonate with me. One of them, it appears to me as though you're living your life, you've got your values, and you're standing by your values, whether people like them or not. And I appreciate that as a formal leader in the system, because, and I appreciate this conversation, because these conversations are hard to come by. I talk to my administrators often, but they know me. You know, like my vice principal, we went through the leadership discerning process together. We took PQP part 2 together, and she's a vice principal and I'm not. And my principal, he was principal of my kid's school for 7 years. His wife works with my wife, and it's like, it's really comfortable in that we know each other well enough to say, hey, like, this doesn't make sense, or don't do that to me, or don't put me in this position. But there are some principals who they're not interested in having any kind of discussion. And it's been my experience that some principals, they don't say anything negative because they don't want to enter into conflict until they're put on the spot and they need to step up for you. And that's when they are like, well, I got nothing positive to say. It's like, well, where have you been the past 4 years? I don't understand why I'm still here. I don't understand why we haven't had this conversation. If you've not considered my service here to be of value, why didn't you say anything? And then there's like loss of respect, and there's all kinds of things. And when the ego comes into play, then you get into trouble, right? And I'm not going to mention any names, but Clough and I have recently had a conversation about my ego getting in the way of something. And when I let my ego go, when I just picked it up and moved it, it's all good. Like, then I win, and whoever is messing with me loses, because they can't get my goat anymore. The ego's not involved. And it sounds to me like your ego once played, a key factor in how you approached your job and the successes that were coming your way. And then it sounds like you kind of had to give it the back seat so that you could move forward. I liked what you said about, you have to grow yourself into a VP position. That really resonates with me, because I remember years ago, I was sitting in one of the leadership program courses, and a superintendent said, and I didn't get it at the time because I was young and dumb. Superintendent said, when you go for a vice principal interview, you're interviewing us as much as we're interviewing you. And I was sitting there looking around like, is this guy for real? I want this job. And he's like, he was way more mature. He was at another level that I didn't understand until now. I get it now. Now it's like, I am who I am. And I think I have positive things to offer the system and school communities and parents and kids and staff. But at the end of the day, if people aren't going to value what I have to offer, then I need to pick up and move on instead of just sitting around wondering what I can do and how to do it. It's like I need to grow into the position. And if I grow and it doesn't fit that position anymore, then that's just the way it is. And it took a long time for me to be able to say that out loud. But now I'm at the point, especially with all this COVID stuff and the pressure and the strange feelings I have teaching like inside of this pandemic, it has shifted my perspective. Like to a point where it feels extreme and I need to take my foot off the gas because I don't know if it's the pandemic talking or if it's like God's calling me in a different direction. But so I just want to bring that back to what you've said, like what you've said about your journey is really interesting to me. And I think I'm really glad you're sharing it because I think people need to hear it because we rarely hear these stories. You know, it's important to hear, oh, EJ had some bumps in the road, but look at EJ now. And so I'd like to think that every time I see you tweet something out about your school community or your staff or your parents and your students, it's like now I'm going to see it coming from a different place because I've heard your story. And you've taken the time to tell it and to disclose it. And that goes a long way with me personally. So
I was just going to say, though, if you ask my staff right now, they'd be the first person to say, like, yeah, he's a rookie. Like he has learning on the job, right? Like, how do you argue with somebody who has 30 years experience teaching grade 1? I'm sorry, there's not a lot I can say to them about their pedagogy that they don't already know or aren't already implementing if they've been really trying for 30 years. So I have to know my place too and recognize that I am just one member of the team that happens to do schedules and deal with some safety concerns. And yeah, at the end of the day, I can ask them to do something if I need to, but more often than not, I just try to get out of their way because they're doing great work, right? And what can I do to support you in doing the great things that you're already doing? I think one thing I do, though, is I do solicit feedback. You know, in my Monday morning memo this last week, I said, what's one thing you're excited about for our team? And I used like a thought exchange. What's one thing you think we need to work on? And what's one thing I need to do as an administrator to support you? So I haven't gotten a lot of feedback, but it was a 4 days of we're rearranging our school. So I'll put in the next Monday morning memo as well. And then hopefully we'll get a lot of feedback from that. But you have to ask for that. But if I model asking for feedback, then I can also expect that for my team. But you ask about thinking like final thoughts. I would say from the journey, I would say learn from your mistakes, but don't be caged by them. I had the privilege of switching boards, but I don't feel like if it was a bigger board, I might have been able to be okay, but I really think I made enough mistakes with enough people where I was just like, I actually need a fresh start, and that's okay. But I needed to do the work to have that fresh start. That's one piece I would say is a big thought for me. I would also say keep trying. Like I did go through 4 different school boards to get there, and I learned something from each one along the way. Like it doesn't just have to be a one-stop shop, and it doesn't have to be anything like that. I don't know. That's all I would say. But I do want to just emphasize too, my previous district, my previous board, they're all good people. Like nobody sat out there and said, hey, how can I make EJ's leadership journey the worst thing ever? I don't think anybody did that. And I think if I look back and say they did this to me, that's robbing me of my own experience and growth and my own learning. I have to say, I made some mistakes. I made some decisions. I did some learning, did a lot of reflecting. And you know what? I'm glad it didn't work out because I love where I'm at right now. Like that's where I'm at, I guess.
We're almost at the end, eh? I have like 22 Post-it notes here. Easily 22, 23 Post-it notes. Here's one thing I do want to circle back to because it's something that out of the 4 of us, I get to be the junior member, despite the fact I might be the oldest. But so me being the junior member here, I've only completed my PQP1. sorry, I won't say only, I have completed my PQP1. What I really dig, one of the things you said is about growing your way, I'll say it, to a leadership role, because without that, let's say, without it being jargonized like that, it's something that I think that I've always had a part of just my general growth, that it isn't like, you could say that you have to have a little bit of hustle, a little bit of grind, that sort of like stick to it to get the stuff done. But those just become checklists unless you have the awareness, I think, of their impact, their legacy, your expansion within it, like how you change within it. So I really dig that, grow your way to an administrative role. I'd like it for another reason too, because me taking the PQP, so I took it this last summer, and I took it, it was a pure digital form, took it through OPC. And one of the things that I mentioned this maybe in a previous episode, there was a moment there where a superintendent was talking to all of us, and there was sort of like the kind of a moment of pause where the superintendent was looking at all of our faces in the Zoom meeting and kind of said, there was some sort of a comment like, "It's so great to see all of you aspiring leaders. I'm sure you are all eager to become an administrator." And everyone gets in on the chat. They're like, yeah, there's like, yeah. And some were even, they're elementary, but already have an interim placement. And their interim placement was contingent on them finishing PQP1. So these were colleagues that were just hopped up on accelerant. Like they really did, bless their hearts, believe that they were ready to take on the role. But I think that's the counterintuitive thinking in this, is that the courses get you there. So I really appreciate that comment about growing your way to the role, because that's slow cooking, right? That ain't a stir fry. You're taking it slow to layer up what your experiences are. And it kind of leads me to this other observation that I have about the expediency and how it messes with your mind. So the concept of sort of standing in the pool, I wrote down that sinking feeling of standing in the pool. And there is a kind of a trope out there that it's not good to be in the pool too long. And now after you've kind of told that story, I get the sense like, and I don't believe it's true. Like, I do not believe that this is a truth. If you've grown and you've sort of gotten to that space where someone has said, okay, you're now, I mean, it really is, it's a hierarchical reward type system, but you've got to the space now where you could be considered for the next step. We just need to have you kind of in this holding pattern, and then we'll see what happens. And I don't know if it's any more specific than that, but it sounds like that's kind of the thing. You're told you're ready, and then you wait, and then you wait, and then you wait. But it feels like there's a counter psychology to it, that the longer you wait, you actually become less viable. Which then makes me think about this whole expediency process again, and our inability to really enjoy the growth, because we come into this thinking that as soon as we qualify, which is just a prerequisite base to take a PQP1, that somehow that's the keys to the role. And I have colleagues right now that are in quote unquote the pool, and they are withering. They are withering because they haven't had the sort of glow from above to say, all right, now it's your turn. Come on up. It seems like there's a lot of anxiety there. And I think from where I sort of stand in my own process, that strikes me as there's some work to be done there. There's some work to be done there about the psychological cost of flooding the pool with candidates. And even to what you said, EJ, about I would like to hire all of you if I can, strikes me also as a bit of a flooding the pool. And I get it, if they're good candidates, sure. But I think it also kind of just increases that anxiety that someone in power tells you you're ready. And it's intoxicating. It's totally intoxicating. So standing in the pool, that's something that I don't know if people quite get, that a little bit of the sort of like the shade that can be on that.
So here's something that I used to believe, and it was hard. It was like, oh, they are better than me because they were placed first. They have more value than me because they are in a VP role and I'm not. I am not a worthy person because somebody didn't put me into X, Y, or Z position. And then you become a principal and you go, I don't care how amazing my grade 8 teacher is. Right now, I don't have a lunch hour supervisor and my life is hell today. Like, everybody has value. And if I had seen it from this side and go, oh my goodness, that person right now in this hour is the most important person to me in my world, and represents safety to 150 kids, like, for their side of the yard. And if not, my life is messed up. And it just, you see everybody's value in what they are and you stop looking at it as a compare game. I want to see them become a better lunch hour supervisor than they used to be. And I don't want them to think that they are less valuable because they're not the grade 4 teacher. The grade 4 teacher is less valuable because they're not the whatever, And it's hard when you're in the pool, because when you're in the pool, all you're looking at is comparing with the others. I know that this principal's retiring, which is going to create this trigger effect, and then this spot's going to open up. And if I'm good enough, I'm going to be in that spot. Well, actually, hold on a second. That community is French immersion school. Do you have a French background? Maybe you're just not the right fit for that community. Or actually, that community is, only going to have that principal for so long because there's an ARC process, and that school is actually going to be shut down. So if we put you there, your growth will be set. Like, we don't always see the big picture. And then sometimes it's like, you know what, maybe you're in a math position, and if we put you in the pool, you'll feel better and you'll work harder for a couple of years, and maybe we actually won't place you. I don't know. Maybe there was that ulterior motive too. I don't know. But I have to hope and believe that they cared, and I have to hope and believe that I learned through that process. Because if I don't, then I just look back with anger and bitterness and malice. And I know there's so many good people in that district that I would not think that, because they're just great people. And a lot of my friends that I was colleagues with as teachers are now administrators there, and I see them doing amazing work, and I learn from them. I follow them on Twitter, and it's great. But now I'm able to say that because I'm a principal and I don't feel insecure. But if I was a teacher still, and when I use that language, even still, that there's a value judgment in that language that I'm using. Still a teacher? Wow. Yes, you're still a teacher and you're doing an amazing thing. Like, even that, how I'm even saying that, I'm recognizing that there's some thinking there that's false, that's not right.
Do you think, EJ, that part of that growth is that, I mean, you're very open now, you're sharing this journey, you're sharing that there were some unsuccessful times for you. Were you able to share that before the same way you were able to share it now? Because now that you've had that growth, you're like, I need to share this so that people understand what the process looks like and how I've grown because of that. Whereas when you were in it, you couldn't see that.
I think when I was in it, there was a candidate who I would argue was not morally sound. And when I say that, I mean, they intentionally had a smirk on their face when we were in meetings together because they were placed and I wasn't. And they made me know it. And I think those people are out there too. And that particular person, I struggled with. I was never one of those people where I'm like, I just can't talk to you in the hallway. I can't talk to you in the hallway with that person. And it was a tough, like, I'm not usually that person, but, that brought out not necessarily the best in me. But I also recognize that, that person is on their journey. I'm on mine now, and we're both in different boards. So, like, that person has their own experiences to do, and I'm secure now. But I needed to fall pretty far and land in the mud and dig myself up and say, okay, what does it really mean to be valuable? What does it really mean to contribute? And what do you want to do when you're here? Because when you're behind that desk, well, first of all, you're not behind the desk very often. You're, grabbing the custodial mop when she's out for lunch. You're dealing with the parent who's screaming at you because the teacher forgot to do X, Y, or Z. And you know what? Sometimes it's like, hold on a second. That wasn't even the teacher's responsibility, but your perception is now my reality, and I'm getting yelled at. And there can't be any ego involved there. You can't pick and choose what you do. So I guess I say all this to say that in the moment, the pain was too great to probably talk about and process. But that pain prepared me for anything that the job is going to throw at me, because you can't be prideful. You can't be arrogant. You just got to be there to serve, and you got to recognize that it's not about you. Even kids in school, like I struggled with this when I first came to St. Peter, our enrollment dropped by 10 kids. And I would be like, oh no, is this about me? And I used to think it was about me. Like, how arrogant is that? People moved out of the neighborhood and they changed their lives around, and I affected that. Come on, like, give your head a shake. But I would look at that and say, if only I did a better job, maybe I'd have more enrollment. And it's like, wait a second, like, you just got to step back. This isn't about you, buddy. This is about the community, and how can you serve the community so that when they come back, they're welcome here. Oh, sorry.
Your talk about being secure now. I hear you say that, and I think to myself, I want to do what I can to continue to be secure with who I am now, and not wait for that later. Like, and I think I'm actually living that right now. I'm in the middle of that. People will say to me, it's funny too, how people assume certain things. So there are people at my building who know that I'm interested in becoming a principal. And so recently I've been getting these funny looks from people, like, how can you, they take one thing and they put everything into that cup, right? The principal cup. And I'm like, just because I aspire to become a formal leader one day in the system doesn't mean that I ignore everything I feel now as a teacher. It doesn't mean that I ignore what my association is doing for me because one day I want to be a principal. Like, I'm really starting to break these molds that people have traditionally created. And it's like, I'm going to be who I am now, and I'm going to be who I am tomorrow. And it depends what it is, right? And at this point in my career, it doesn't matter to me if somebody says to me, the things you've been saying lately, the way you've been acting, people might not think you're principal material. And I'm like, okay, thanks. It was good knowing you. And I'm going to keep journeying on, and you can do whatever it is you need to do. This business of like shifting gears so that you are pre-planning something that you'd like to happen in the future, it doesn't operate that way. Life doesn't work that way. And there have been times where I've done the same thing to others where, I've heard, you see somebody operate on a daily basis, and then all of a sudden you hear that they want to become a principal, and your brain is like, oh, but something doesn't fit. And I've actually had great conversations with people where I've said to them, really? I didn't know you were interested in administration. And this is why I didn't. This is why when I heard it, I was like, it doesn't fit. There's a cognitive dissonance here. And they've said to me, we really appreciate you taking the time to explain that to me, because my reality is the same thing. And I just feel like I want more. And I never could verbalize it because I had been boxed into what you see today. But that's not really what I'm about. And it's like you open the door to that conversation. Next thing you know, you get to learn about somebody in a way that you've never learned before. So it's been interesting lately because people are looking to me like, you're not acting very principal-like. And I was like, oh, I didn't know I was a principal. I thought I was the grade 3 teacher down the hall that has a family at home and things outside of this place to do. So why is it that I can't be that person in your eyes? I don't really stick around for the conversation. I just kind of throw it out there, and I'm like, if you want to talk to me, you know where to find me. I'm not giving this any more time. If I want to be a principal, I will work towards that. And if I don't, I won't. But it's just, the whole thing is interesting. And it's so freeing to be in a position where you know what you value and you stand by them. It doesn't mean you're inflexible. It just means there's a perimeter around you, and you know where that line is, and you're not willing to cross it for low-hanging fruit. And people might not like that about you, and that's okay, because it's not about being liked. It's about everybody's on a journey, and you just keep moving on your path, and it takes you wherever it takes you. So you've got me really reflecting on that, and I thank you for that. Any final words, Chris or Ramona, for Eli before we shut this episode down?
Lots of thought fuel. Lots of thought fuel. No, I think it's cool to hear the story. Again, to be able to sort of have your perspective from it was multimodal, right? Like you're sort of doing to talk about impact on ego, impact on family, talking about how different boards, kind of run their shows. I think, dude, you offered up a buffet.
Yeah, I really appreciated that as well. The look at the way different boards run the process, because each board does run it a little bit differently. And I just recently attended a meeting for our board, and a couple of things you said are part of it, and a couple of things are not. And you wonder why is the process so different between them? And I appreciate you sharing that. I also really liked what you were saying about growing your way, because I think what Roland and Chris are getting at is, and what you're showing too, is that through that growth, we learn who we are. And by learning who we are, we know where the lines are, and we understand our own integrity. And I value that a lot. So thank you, EJ.
And I noticed you put some things in the chat about, be careful. I don't want to be somebody I'm not, if I, and I find leaders are like teachers. There's so many different teachers. There's so many different leaders, and you can't be EJ. You can't be Roland. You've got to be you, right? You got to bring Ramona to the role, and you've got to do it your way. And that's okay. And you'll find the most successful leaders they're not successful because they do it the same way. They bring their whole selves to the role, and they do it in a way that works for them, and they're authentic, because people know when you're faking it and trying to be something you're not, but I appreciate the opportunity that you guys have given me to reflect. Probably wouldn't have been able to have these conversations 5 years ago, but definitely I'm grateful for the learning that's taken place, and grateful for the opportunity to just process it all. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your time and for talking through your process.
Yeah, your process. Hashtag your process. Oh, I haven't even tweeted. I should have been live tweeting. I'm sorry.
It's all good. It was a great conversation. You've given us a lot to reflect on. And your story is it's a good one for people to check out and archive, and to consider, what the process can look like for them, right? So if anybody wants to reach out to EJ, it's at Eli_James Hunt on Twitter. He's very approachable, so feel free to tweet out to him, and follow his school's Twitter page as well, and you'll see what's going on in that building and outside that building. It's pretty cool stuff. And hey, I'm happy that you're one of my colleagues and we work for the same board, because that's kind of cool. Usually there's not a lot of representation with WCDSB when it comes to me and podcasting. So it's kind of cool to have a principal jump on and talk about his journey and his experience. So big thanks. It's Thanksgiving weekend in Canada. So a big happy Thanksgiving to you three and to everybody who's listening. Peace be with all of you, and have a great night.
Yeah.
Big thanks,
All
folks.
right.
Big thanks.
Big thanks.
Take care.
Have a good one.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah.